video is being recorded. Thank you for joining us, where we'll be discussing the Mansion House, its preservation efforts, and our matching gift campaign, a campaign which is dedicated to our exterior building preservation projects. I'm Chris O'Neill, the Executive Director. We also have with us a great panel of individuals who can speak to different aspects of the efforts to preserve the Mansion House. A few Zoom procedures. All of our viewers are muted, except for our panelists. We will happily take questions after the talk. So if you can put your questions in the chat box and we'll read them at the end. And as I mentioned, we are recording this talk today. So with us today, we have Jonathan Palica, board chair, Jamie Trevette, an architect with Valenspina Architects and an officer on the board, Carolyn Strobel, Kenwood of Kenwood Benevolent Society, Mike Comey, our Director of Buildings and Grounds, and Chelsea Sherman, our Guest Services leader and our Zoom master. For every historic building, people ask, why should this building be saved? For the Mansion House, the answers vary. Because the greenest building is a building already standing, because the Mansion House is an impressive example of 19th century architecture, because it's well designed and constructed, perhaps because it's a nostalgic centerpiece of the region, maybe because it's a museum, a historic inn, a cultural performance space, or all of the above. The Mansion House is also, though, a National Historic Landmark, one that was designated in 1965, which means it was deemed a national treasure. In the 19th century, during a time of turmoil and religious fervor, the Oneida community was one of the most successful utopian experiments in the nation. The Oneida community were Bible communists. They called themselves perfectionists, and they were founded by the clergyman John Humphrey Noyes. They lived together as one extended family, sharing all life, love, and work. Chelsea, if you can go to slide 2, where we can show Mr. Noyes and the family, and then if you can go to slide 3, please. The Mansion House's design and evolution reflected and reinforced the Oneida community's ideals and practices. The 93,000 square foot Mansion House was built in 5 stages from 1861 to 1914 as the community became more successful and expanded, eventually housing up to 300 people. The commune lasted for 30 years, then evolved into a joint stock company that eventually became Oneida Limited. The Mansion House is a record of that evolution, transitioning from a communal home and a place of work to a home owned by a business to today, where it is still a residence, a museum, a historic inn, all owned by a not-for-profit. In all cases, the Mansion House is an important center of the surrounding community. The next slide, please. The Oneida community lived on the site since 1848, living in a simple wood structure, one that is seen here in the upper right with the people in front. But as they became more successful socially and economically, they began to build the Mansion House that we know today. And that Mansion House was a reflection of their values and a manifestation of their success as a communal society. Essentially, the Oneida community were very PR savvy, as we might think of them today. They took stage photos of their members interacting on the grounds, and they sold these photos to visitors as postcards. Each of these images you see on the slide are examples of those postcards. They welcomed visitors, gave them tours, sold them food, refreshments, and they even had guest rooms for them. They were consciously controlling their image and using their home and its design to promote their ideals and their way of life. And these photos are examples of that. Next slide, please. The evolution of today's sprawling landmark began with the 1862 main house. Erastus Hamilton was the lead architect, but the community was deeply involved in the design. The house is done in an Italian villa style, built in the style of popular designs at the time. The design featured large central public spaces that were surrounded by small private spaces, which encouraged and reinforced the importance of communal living. Next slide, please. As this slide shows, in 1863, when the Tontine was built, it was a separate building to the west of the main house. Visible on the left are the original wood mansion house and the children's house, buildings which are no longer on the site. Next slide. Inside the 1862 building, the interior design illustrates a feature of Oneida community life. Features of Oneida community life. There's individual bedrooms located around communal areas. One of the communal areas, the stunning communal areas, is the big hall or the family hall, where the Oneida community gathered daily for a communal meeting. But it was also a place for sharing entertainment. The family hall exemplified the community's dedication to culture, to celebrating life as pleasurable for themselves and for others. The perfectionists frequently performed free musicals and theatrical shows for the public. Next slide. As the community planned their next expansions, they removed the original wood mansion house seen here in the upper right. And they expanded the Tontine, which is on the lower left, to serve as a dining facility for their growing community. Next slide, please. Oh, I think okay. I'm sorry, you're right, Chelsea. So with the growth and success of the community came a need to house more members. In this case, children, coinciding with the Oneida community's stirpiculture efforts or their planned procreation efforts. So like the 1862 building, the 1870 buildings were called the Children's Wing. We call them today the South Wing. They were also designed by Erastus Hamilton, and they referenced Second Empire motifs. This section housed the children of the family in one space because they raised, showing their intention to raise all their children communally. This building was a more modern space, one that incorporated some of the latest theories about health and hygiene, which you'll see as a common theme. And some of those features included central steam heating, a bathroom on each floor, hot and cold water faucets. They also installed flushable toilets called earth closets, and there was a small kitchen in the center of the wing with a faucet that was connected to a cistern that collected rainwater, so the children would have fresh water for their needs. Next slide, please. In 1877, as the community consolidated other satellite outposts, they planned perhaps their grandest addition of all, the new house, which was designed in a Victorian Gothic style. The new house was designed by Lewis W. Leeds, a prominent architecture firm from New York City. And at the time of the planning, the Oneida community was being run by Dr. Theodore Noyes, who was the eldest son of John Humphrey Noyes. And this design was most likely influenced by the malaria outbreak in their satellite outpost of Wallingford, Connecticut. Hence their focus on creating a healthy environment. And Lewis Leeds' firm was noted for designing healthy buildings of the time, big institutional buildings. The plans for this building included cutting-edge ventilation technology with ducts and shafts and towers, and even 2 ventilation towers that you can see here on the top of this building. Unfortunately, those ventilation towers no longer exist. Later, in 1914, the mansion house footprint was completed and established with the 2-story addition of the lounge and the solarium, which connected the new house with the Tontine. So the design and construction of the mansion house represented some of the highest standards of construction and technology of their time. I think we can still learn from them today. If you'd like to learn more, I hope you check the website for our May architecture tours, or check out Tony Wonderly's new book, The Look of Utopia. Now, I'm going to pass this along to Mike Comey. Mike Comey is our Director of Buildings and Grounds. Mike has been in this position for 15 years and has a deep knowledge of the building and its systems. And he's going to talk about the needs of the building and some of our efforts.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome, everyone. I'm here this evening to talk about the structural needs, issues, and challenges that we face with our buildings and are facing with our buildings, as well as to give you some insight on things we are currently doing and some things we have done as related to preservation of our interiors and mechanicals. Next slide, please. Here is a roof schematic with a leak profile that we created, showing the 5 different buildings, all encompassed as one. All the markings you see on there reflect past current roof leaks with Band-Aids on them, as well as incorrect mortar, as well as a reflection of damaged interiors. Currently, there are 13 marked areas on this roof leak analysis. You can increase that by 3 more that occurred over this past winter. Hence the reason we do like to reflect on this, because things seem to be deteriorating at a rather more rapid pace than what we've experienced in the last 10 years or so. Next slide. So to jump into the inside of the building, here's an example of a roof leak from the 1862 building that has affected the Trump loyal painting and the ceilings and the walls. Next slide. Here are 3 different, here we go. Yep, 3 different places on the building where water infiltration has created problems in apartments and common areas. The first photo on your left is in an apartment in the 1862 building. I can tell you already that's due to incorrect mortar on the outside of the building holding moisture in. The moisture has been sucked into the building throughout time and creates issues with the interior paint surfaces on the plaster. Picture number 2 is also an apartment on the 3rd floor in the south wing of the building, where that is a definitive of ice damage due to inferior and deteriorated flashings on a dormer situation, along with the chimney situation. And the 3rd picture on your right is the library corridor that connects the 1862 building to the new house. And that is a reflection of water infiltration from splashback of 3 different roof areas that compile and splash down on the ground and back onto porches and back onto the building itself. Next slide. So this is a very good picture of incompatible mortar that was done not intentionally to be incompatible, but through the years, as Oneida Limited owned and took care of the facility. As you can imagine, a building of this age, mortar deteriorates. Unfortunately, no one knew at the time when they were replacing mortar with modern mortar that you could not put Portland cement in mortar joints of an older building where mortar was actually a lime putty based mortar. The bricks, they need to breathe. Moisture comes in, moisture needs to be released. This small area that you see on the bottom left of the picture with the gray, the bright gray, shows you the incorrect Portland cement. That's noted throughout the building in different areas and has created many problems. You can see the bricks themselves are actually deteriorated looking. They are spalled, which means the freeze and thaw cycles have made the face of the bricks pop and deteriorate themselves. Next slide. Here's an even more duplicative example of that. This is the library corridor as we were just talking about, that connects the 1862 building and the new house, which is currently covered in 2 stories of rubber, so the water cannot get in there. But over the years, you can see where the freeze and thaw cycles have really deteriorated the brickwork on this. Next slide. Excuse me. In the quadrangle of the mansion house, this is the south wing, west facing facade. What you see there with the white woodwork, we refer to as an all-encompassed cornice. Above that cornice is a mansard roof, which is the lower roof covered in slates from the upper roof. There's been many years of deteriorated flashings, sealants that have leaked in and behind the dormers and have gotten in behind the cornice, and it has resulted in deterioration that you'll see on the next slide, please. Behind the cornice right there. Those are 6 layers of bricks. The wall is 6 layers thick. The mortar has deteriorated from all the water damage. As you can definitely see, the woodwork on the cornice has deteriorated and come apart. Next slide. Okay, so all right, so we're done with as far as the deterioration goes. What we have been doing, historic preservation work to date, you see an example of Daniel Main is a contractor that we had here for a recent grant funded project from the New York State Legislature and the late Lang Hatcher, window restoration project, where we actually went through and worked on 36 different windows throughout the facility. Next slide. Some more examples of preservation work we have been doing. In 2018, we went through and did a $250,000 boiler replacement project. This included removal of 3 boilers that heat the building that were installed in the 1960s. It also included an asbestos abatement project extensively in that boiler room. And we replaced 2 boilers with 3 brand new sectional boilers. Another example is the lounge floor project we recently did. We had the lounge floor refinished. Next slide. In 2019, the previous curator, Abigail Lawton, and myself hosted a Cornell University Historic Preservation Planning Work Weekend where 35 students came, along with professors, along with alumni, and we worked on projects such as window work, porch restoration, interior faux painting. We also worked on the grounds as we could, doing restoration of the walking paths, although that particular weekend, the weather was not very cooperative. Next slide. Here's an example here. Here's a picture of Jeff Chusid, Cornell professor, along with alumni Grant Johnson. We were in our paint shop down in the basement, taking apart actual railings and banisters from some of the porches that have deteriorated. Here you see an example of them labeling, dissecting them, so we can make new parts and put them back together. Next slide. Here's an example of faux grain painting. If you walk in, this is the entrance to the mansion house. You might think when you walk in, it is actually stained woodwork. It is not. It's faux paint, which means originally they took different color variations of pigments and they created what looks like a natural stain. So on the left, you see what it looked like before Cornell Work Weekend, and on the right, you see what it looks like after the Cornell Work Weekend restoration of the faux grain painting. Next slide. And last but not least, I will talk about the removal of the woody plantings around the mansion house. As many of you are very familiar with the mansion house, you know that it actually, if you've read the latest article in the journal that I did about the foundation plantings. They have created a lot of damage, both above and below grade to the building. The maintenance staff has removed probably 95% of these plantings, and we are going to actually, we're going to actually work on the building. And at such point, when all the drainage work is done from the roof work projects, we're going to reestablish some of the plantings, but they're not going to be of any magnitude like you see right here. They're going to be more of the vegetative type that are ground level. And with this, I will turn it over to Jamie Trevette.
Thank you, Mike. I'm actually going to jump in here. I would like to introduce Jamie Trevette. Jamie Trevette is not only a board member and an officer with the Mansion House who's been on the board for several years. He's also an architect with Balanced Architects. He's a building envelope expert and actually has done work before at the Mansion House. So he's well-versed in the building and has a large amount of experience. Jamie has really been helpful in helping us as a board and an organization understand the needs of the building and help us plan going forward. So thank you, Jamie, for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure. And we'll get started here. If we could go to the next slide. Actually, we advance one more. So the building is superbly built originally. Every addition was well done. The materials were excellent. Fantastic brick, quality brick. The roofs were very good slate from Vermont. Everything was well designed. Drainage was originally built into the roof structures, and everything was thought of. And those woody plants that Mike talked about, aren't original to the building. They're not period specific, and they would have shown off the building. So we're removing those, and the building, even interior, the spaces are very well laid out. Much of those original spaces are intact. Certainly the public spaces, as Chris alluded to, are very much intact, and they're really magnificent spaces. And just moving through the building is interesting because it's sort of a mystery because it's so big. There's always something lurking around the corner to draw your eye and keep you moving and keep you curious. So I do love it. It's been around for 140 years. So it's really a testament to those materials. And those quality materials are part of our puzzle. I mean, those are our hint to what to do next and how to repair things. Thinking of what materials to use, we really want to retain using those same materials, that slate for the roofs, the right brick, the right mortar, as Mike alluded to. I think we can go to the next slide. This is the south wing, and Mike alluded to the improper mortar on the second story there, just above the balustrade. You can see actually the mortar is sort of a light gray, and with the brick, that's that improper mortar. That's and so we've had to assess what is improper, what's going to cause us long-term damage, and what kind of condition is it now, today, and how quickly do we have to act on it. So with each element, be it the roof, the walls, the windows, the foundation, we're always thinking about this. And, I alluded to the fact that gutters were included in this building, and you can actually see a downspout in this one. A lot of the original gutters were concealed gutters. They were discreetly hidden in the architecture. You didn't see them. And those were, eventually, those got to be, they got to be troublesome, and they reached the end of their serviceable life. And instead of rebuilding them, unfortunately, the thinking at the time, much like the mortar issue, was that you should abandon them and let the water fall to grade, or apply some, half round gutter to the facade. And so, and those actually failed too. And all that water collection has been a problem for us. And I can go to the next slide, I think. So this is myself and Scott Lupini from Lupini Masonry, looking at the building, and we're actually just below where that brick was falling out that Mike had shown us, and looking at the condition of the walls. And this just evidences finding the right experts to help us with the building project and understand what's wrong with the building and what we need to do and who we need, collecting those experts to help us figure out how to best repair it and what sequence to do those repairs. So, you know, we've really relied on a lot of engineers, architects, and certainly other experts. So we can go to the next slide. This is an example of us gathering information. I guess my big push is to make sure that we're making the right decisions for the right reasons, and having data to back up our decisions is very important. So we're not in a rush to do anything, but we need to do things in a very stepwise fashion. So this is an example of a crack monitor. This is in some of the exhibit rooms in the main house. We've been noticing some movement in this wall, and we want to find out if it's still active. And this is an example of that. We've also got moisture meters inside the building, you know, tying into those gutters, all that water management from the roof to the facade to the grade and the foundation. And so we've got museum spaces inside. So we have to be very conscious of the moisture levels inside the building. So we are using those moisture meters, those data loggers, to record relative humidity and temperature in different spaces that we've identified. And so that's helping us gather data. So to that end, we can go to the next slide. Critical areas. So this is an example. This is actually the main house is to your left, and the new house is actually to your right. So we're kind of looking at the corridor connecting the two. The library is just on the opposite side of the corridor. This is actually the same slide area that Mike had shown with the bricks balls in the lower left that are really the faces have come right off the brick, and that all has to do with moisture coming off these adjacent roofs. There's two roofs you really can't see above the frame, and all this water coming off the roof, splashing back on the facade, and the wall and the brick. It's a great flywheel for moisture, but it can only handle so much. And this is just clearly evidences that there's a limit to what it can handle. And so we need to do something different here. And that's part of what we're getting to. We're getting to a project to address these issues. And we can go to the next slide, I think. So this is what can happen if you have long-term masonry damage, you know, through moisture. And this could be roof moisture. And I would also point out that it also could be foundation moisture, which is called rising damp, which is basically ground moisture that creeps up through the masonry, and it can do this kind of damage. So you're seeing deep erosion of the soft original mortar in the wall. And as Mike discussed earlier, the bricks have sort of eroded. And I liken bricks to like a loaf of bread. It's got a crust on it when they fire it, which is robust and waterproof, but that inside is kind of soft and doughy. And when you have too much moisture in a wall system, this is what you get. So left photo is deterioration of our walls, our porch balustrades, our decks, and all because of water moisture management. It affects interior spaces, the basement, porches, historical elements in the building. It's really quite a problem. Next slide, please. All right, so we've gotten, actually, this is the culmination of, Chris, maybe a year-long process with working with Crawford & Stearns architects out of Syracuse. It's actually going out to bid this week, and work will begin in 2021. So these drawings address those water management issues that was identified early on as one of the major contributing factors to the deterioration of the facades. So, we can keep going. I think there's a couple of these. It just shows you the effort that's gone into identifying the needs of the building and prioritizing those needs and finding out what we can do with the money we have currently to protect the building as best we can. And we're going to do it in a stepwise. We can't afford it all today, and Jonathan will speak to that in a minute. But so this is the first of a couple projects. So we can take the next slide. Again, some more details. We're handling snow and ice management too, in impacts, so it doesn't damage facades and brick, and we don't get ice dams and things like that. So all of this is managing Mother Nature. And I think we can go to the next slide. Future projects. So we've got, is this where I'm gonna depart, Chris? Or I'll let you take this.
Okay, well, this was a design for a gutter project, which we hope will be part of this, the project that'll begin this year. But I think it just it's here to just remind us that my understanding is that we need to start from the top of the building down, as Jamie and Mike have outlined, and that we will be beginning a Save the Roof water mitigation project this year. And we're seeking the remaining match, which Jonathan will talk a little more about. And then we're going to begin phase 2 project planning and grant writing this year. So next slide, please, Chelsea. Now I want to introduce our board chair, Jonathan Palika. Jonathan is a financial planner in his real life, but he can be found at the Mansion House almost as much as anyone. He has, I believe, over 20 years of institutional knowledge at the Mansion House, serving on various committees. So he's the perfect person to lead us at this moment. And, you know, I think I just want to echo what, you know, Jamie said, the planning has been 2-3 years, actually before, when, you know, Pat Hoffman was the director and they worked on the building envelope condition report. But now I'm actually, Jonathan, going to ask you a couple questions, I think, to start you off. Can we go to the next slide, Chelsea? Well, this is Jonathan with Mimi and Eric Noyes. Eric was also a former board member. And this is really just represents all the members and donors who have supported the organization. But Jonathan, my question, can you talk about the phase 1 funding from the board and organizational level, and maybe some of the planning that's gone into that?
Sure, and this goes back to when we started with the building envelope condition report, and we go back through our $6 million giant book and kind of come back to how do we do this and to be able to pull it off in phases. So where we are now in phase 1 would be a project that's about $1.2 million. And the first portion of that was $600,000 from the Red Sea and the EPF grant. And from there, we have the matching of the next 600,000. And right now we're about 900,000 in total of our 1.2 million. So we've raised approximately $300,000 of that 600 match that we need. And that's been a portion of the Preservation League, Oneida Savings Bank Charitable Foundation, Kenwood Benevolent Society. We're currently seeking funding from Central New York Community Foundation, and then obviously from the members and donors and supporters that we have. So we're a fair amount along the way, and obviously, as I think both Jamie and Chris alluded to also, you know, here we are partially, you know, in this phase here and already looking to beginning to write the grants for the next phase. So there's been a lot of planning and there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes to just keep the work moving. And like Jamie said too, we'll do as much as we can as long as the money's there and we continue moving forward. But I think we all came to realize too, there's only so much work that can be done in one point in time also. So
You can go to next slide, Chelsea. Yeah, this is Jamie and Sarah Whalen Smith and Jonathan. Surely inspecting some crack.
Yeah, and I see the board planning on the side too. So, where all this started really with board planning and strategic planning. And I know for people that have been here before and listened, we had brought in the George Development Group to kind of, as development consultants to look into, where do we stand and what's our capacity for a capital campaign. And, they were blunt and brutally honest, and that we didn't have the resources and we didn't have the capacity to sustain this ongoing construction work that we needed to do, or the renovations that needed to happen. So part of this too then became, how can we then sustain things over time? So that was many extra meetings for the board too, to go through this, but to come up with a business plan that would allow us to not be reliant on donors and grants for everything, and to start to build a revenue model that will help sustain ongoing projects as we move forward. Because that's the largest part of this too, is we can get caught up for what I always think of Lang always talking about, our deferred maintenance and perhaps what's been done in the past. But the thing is, we need to keep up with it moving forward. Once we get caught up, we can't just breathe a sigh of relief and think our work is done. So we really felt the only way we're going to be able to do this is do it on our own and create a revenue model that will grow over the next few years to help us while we're in these renovation phases, so that we can be up to the point where we can start to maintain everything moving forward after that. So it's a long road at this point, but that's the plan overall for the board. And we anticipate actually too, this work is probably going to go somewhere over the next 10 years. So it will probably be longer than all of us, but that's I think we can circle back to the beginning and say how important the house is as the biggest piece in our collection and the most important.
Chelsea, do you want to go? Fits in with yeah, that we're also funding the museum and education, and also preserving the site for wonderful events like this one. Good. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. I'm going to turn this over to Carolyn Strobel. Carolyn's a board member with Kenwood Benevolent Society.
Thank you so much, Christine. Hello, everyone. Chelsea, could you head to the next slide really quickly? Okay, perfect. So I'm Carolyn Strobel. I'm a board member of the Kenwood Benevolent Society. I'm also the baby featured in these photos from September of 1988, taken on the Mansion House grounds. Before I share a little bit about the Kenwood Benevolent Society and the preservation campaign that we're doing with the Mansion House, I want to share just a little bit of background about myself. I'm an Oneida community descendant, and I grew up in Kenwood, the neighborhood where the Mansion House is located. I spent lots of time in the Mansion House and on its ground growing up. My great-grandmother lived in an apartment in the building for my whole life. We would go into the Mansion House for Thanksgiving dinner, for Christmas gatherings, for musical performances, and I spent lots of time running around the grounds on the swing set, at the lake, and the sandbox. I've been a member of the Kenwood Benevolent Society board since 2019. And my day job, currently, I'm the director of the entrepreneurship program down at Colgate University. Previously, I was a member of their advancement fundraising team. And prior to that, I worked in marketing at 2 nonprofits, as well as at a couple tech companies. So the next slide features 2 primary documents that relate to the formation of the Kenwood Benevolent Society, which was started in 1902 by a group of Oneida community descendants. KBS was formed for 2 reasons, and these are outlined in the letter to join the board that's on the left-hand side of the screen. The first was to provide a support network for Oneida community descendants. The individuals who formed KBS recognized that the community, when it was in existence, provided a support net for individuals when sickness or hard times hit. And also recognized that following the community's dissolution, that built-in support structure was no longer there. The second reason that KBS was formed was to support what they refer to as the common Kenwood home, which continued to be the home of many descendants and their children, and to improve this building and preserve it from the time at which it was begun underneath the community. On the next slide is another primary source document, an article from the Quadrangle Journal from 1902 about the creation of KBS. And KBS has continued for almost 120 years. We currently have 11 members, all of whom are descendants of the Oneida community and live locally. We manage a sizable fund, about $1 million in assets, and we donate every year to the Oneida community as our primary beneficiary, but we also support 12 to 15 other local charities in any given year. One thing that's worth noting is that over time, we've moved from supporting individuals to supporting local organizations. So continuing to live out our organization's mission by supporting community groups that are then supporting the individuals, families, children, and others who live in the local area. This year, when our group met in the fall, we were really taken by the building conditions of the mansion house. We had attended the annual meeting. Christine gave a presentation to our group as well, read over some of the quotes from the architects, and it really seemed that this was a critical moment in time for the mansion house and its building. And so our group decided to make a larger gift than usual to support the mansion house so that we could really dedicate those funds toward making an outsized impact. When we were discussing making this larger gift, we also brainstormed ways to really increase the impact. And one of those was through a matching gift campaign. And in that situation, I raised my hand to help given my fundraising experience. So from January through May, I worked with the OCMH team to put together a special campaign to support the historic preservation of the mansion house. This was really a collaborative effort between myself as the KBS representative, the Oneida community staff, as well as board members who donated their time and expertise. So you'll see on the next slide our campaign webpage, and we'll be sure to share a link with this in the chat shortly so you can check it out yourselves. We launched our campaign May 1st with an email and a direct mail letter, and we've already, as of yesterday, May 10th, we've raised $20,000 in donations for a total impact of $40,000 raised. And the total commitment from KBS is to match up to $75,000 in gifts. In particular, it's been really exciting to see both broad support from many of those connected to the mansion house, as well as deep support, and that our supporters are really recognizing that this is a critical moment in the building's trajectory. The campaign will continue all throughout the month of May, coinciding with Historic Preservation Month, and we have a social media campaign that's happening at the same time, additional emails. After the campaign concludes, we will be providing regular follow-up about the project for donors so that they can truly see the impact that their donations are making. And so why do we feel so passionately about KBS? If we head to the next slide, I think there are some photos that really highlight some of the reasons why we did this. For us as descendants, there is a personal connection to the mansion house and the Oneida community, but even more so, it's really going back to what Christine was talking about at the beginning of this webinar. The mansion house is an important part of local history and heritage. It is so unique. It's a museum that showcases the really, really unique history of the Oneida community. It also is connected to the industrial history of Oneida Limited Manufacturing, as well as artistic history of the braidings of Jessie Catherine Kinsley. The mansion house is a regional landmark. It's a location of performances and cultural events. It has beautiful grounds, including sweeping lawns, a lake, and nature trails, helping to preserve the local environment and the beauty of central New York. And it's a residence to this day. Some number of the people who live in the mansion house currently are descendants of the Oneida community, but many of them are the first in their families to call the building home. In these many ways, the impact of the mansion house is truly far-reaching, and it's for these reasons why its preservation is so important. And so on behalf of all of us at KBS and at the mansion house, I would like to say thank you to those of you on the call who've already made donations during this matching campaign period. For those of you who are hearing about the campaign for the first time, I hope you will consider making a contribution. Even the smallest donations make a difference, and every dollar you give will be doubled by KBS. Thank you all so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I'll hand it back to Christine.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And I just want to echo her words and thank everyone for joining, and thank KBS for their commitment, their leadership in this effort as well. So as Carolyn mentioned, the matching gift campaign ends May 31st. You can visit, the best way to learn more about it is to visit our website, oneidacommunity.org/preservation campaign. And you can, at that point, support the building, learn more about the campaign, about the Mansion House, and about KBS and their commitment. If you're local, I encourage you to come join one of our 3 free outside architecture tours. They'll be talking more in depth about the architecture of the building and the history of the building. And those are offered this month on the 15th, the 19th, and the 22nd. And again, that'll be listed on our website. You can visit oneidacommunity.org/events. We also plan to open this June on a limited basis. We're going to do the best we can to accommodate visitors, and we're really looking forward to that. So please check our website for more information on those plans. And now our panel is available to answer your questions. So please, if you haven't already, put your questions in the chat box.